Tashi Dele, and welcome to the Tibet Radio Hour. I have a guest on the telephone from somewhere in the world, Mr. Alan Wallace. Welcome to KVMR's Tibet Radio Hour, Alan.
Thank you, Joseph.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very clearly, yes. I hope
Excellent.
You can hear me as well.
Alan Wallace is a Buddhist scholar, Buddhist book author, translated books of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, sometime on and off translator for His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, essayist, writes magazine articles, travels all over the world lecturing, teaching, leading workshops, and has a couple of centers in different places. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
You put the rest of us to shame. None of us have done that much. How do you do
I
it?
just said I'm old, that's all. I'm old. I've been doing this a long time.
So how did you get are you an ordained monk?
I was for 14 years. I received my novice ordination in 73, full ordination by His Holiness in 75. But then after 14 years living in the West, I just felt this was, and feeling I needed to stay in the West. I never was very healthy in India, living in Asia. I just found it was not a very conducive environment to follow the monastic way of life. So I formally gave back my precepts, my monastic precepts, in 1987. So for 14 years, I was an ordained monk. Ever since then, my devotion to Dharma, to practicing, to teaching, translating, and so on is the same as it was before, but without the monastic format for my life.
Mm-hmm. And you started out with to be a scientist. Is that true?
Well, when I was 13, I had a wonderful science teacher, a woman named Sally Vogel, with whom I'm still in contact, who instilled in me a love of nature and an aspiration to devote my life to environmental activism, to becoming an ecologist, wildlife biologist, and all of that. So from the age of 13 till 20, I had utterly my sights set on pursuing a career in science and specifically in ecology. But then at the age of 20, very briefly, I was looking at the underlying reasons why humanity, in complete, violation of our own self-interests, are violating, even back then, violating our environment, making it more and more uninhabitable for ourselves while decimating other species. And I was wondering why. Why are we doing this? Is it simply a matter of legislation, or is it the big bad corporations? And it really struck me the underlying reasons for us doing this, violating our own environment, are not found in governments or businesses. They're found in the human mind. And in Buddhism, as I think you probably know, we have these three fundamental toxins or afflictions of the mind, of ignorance and of greed and of hatred. And I think if we look at the reasons why we as a human civilization, human society, still to this day are devastating our environment, it comes out of ignorance, and it does come out of greed and short-sightedness, and frankly stupidity. And therefore, if we are to really get to the root of understanding and overcoming the reasons for our destroying our environment, then we have to go deep into the mind, and I think Buddhism has very deep answers there.
Did you find...
That was a shift. That was a shift then from devoting to ecology to devoting myself for the last 49 years to studying and practicing Buddhism.
Did you find that Tibetan Buddhism answered more questions than science?
They answer different kinds of questions. That is, there's nothing to substitute for modern physics, chemistry, biology, or for that matter, modern ecology. The technology, the methods of research and so forth are outstanding, and they show us what is happening, and they show us how it's happening in terms of the environmental degradation, but they don't show us why are we, humans with our extraordinary intelligence or imagination, why are we not behaving in our own best interests? They don't explain that. And so all of the activity tends to be outwards, because this is the strength of modernity. All the attention is focused outwards to the physical, the quantifiable, the objective, but we tend to overlook the inner causes of happiness and the inner causes of unhappiness, and why we do things that are so counter to our own and everybody else's well-being. So that was the shift. I think some people refer to Buddhism as deep ecology. I think that's what it is, in fact.
When His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama first came into exile in India, and in his first press conference, somebody asked what what is Buddhism? And I believe he answered training the mind, which confused everybody. Years later, he said it was a philosophy of life, which people got a little better. And now he just says, if I have a religion, my religion is kindness. He's brought it down to the simplest possible way to explain anything. So have we lost the basic human kindness? Is that part of this whole thing?
No, I think His Holiness being the great unifier, emphasizing common ground, acknowledging but not emphasizing the differences between Buddhism and other religions, Buddhism and science, and so forth. I think he's really nurturing the common ground, and every sensible, decent person values kindness, and so that's where he's planting his staff, so to speak. So it's not that we've lost kindness, but I think, and now my own opinion here, is that especially over the last 150 years, during the rise from the Industrial Revolution, but simultaneously the increasing dominance of materialism, and together with materialism, hedonism as the way to find happiness, and consumerism to put that into gear. We've seen this, over this 150 years, more damage to the planet than anything that's occurred since the meteor hit 65 million years ago. And so if we come back to Buddhism here, it's not that we're not kind, but we have ignorance that we're born with, but also the acquired ignorance of everything just boils down to matter and the emergent properties of matter, a completely reductionistic, dehumanizing, and demoralizing view of human existence, but also reality as a whole. And with 7.8 billion people devoting ourselves primarily to pursuing happiness, looking outwards, to stimulation, to acquisition, wealth, power, fame, and then consumerism, this is a kind of a strategy to find happiness and a view of reality that's been increasingly dominant for 150 years, which is actually destroying the planet and undermining human civilization. So this is something new. Kindness has always been important. Delusion, greed, and hatred have always been afflictions. But I would say something I think is, having translated for His Holiness intermittently since 1979, I think I speak completely in accordance with his larger view when we move beyond simply a phrase, my religion is kindness, to recognizing that Buddhism has always been, or always had facets of religion, no doubt about it. It has facets of religion. But from the very beginning of the Buddha's own teachings, there are profoundly philosophical elements of Buddhism as well that are driven by logic, by clear reasoning, empirical evidence, and that's not religion. And then there are the radically empirical elements of Buddhist meditation, Buddhist inquiry, excuse me. And so it is, and His Holiness is often referred to Buddhist science, Buddhist mind science. And so Buddhism as a whole doesn't neatly fit into any of these three categories that are created out of Western civilization, religion, philosophy, and science, but it has aspects of all three, and yet, how do you say, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Kindness is a motivating factor for it all.
What I find amazing is I've been attending Buddhist teachings with a local geshe who's in town 6 months a year, and something that was written in Nalanda in the 13th century, or something that was written in the 12th century, is 100% applicable to today's modern life. I mean, they talk about all these things that happens to the mind and the way you think, and these things that you happen with other people in your interaction and your communication, and they realized this thousands of years ago.
His Holiness has been sometimes quite blunt, and I will echo his words. When he says, when it comes to the science of the mind, understanding the mind, its origins, its potential, what happens at death, what are the true causes of suffering, what are the true causes of happiness, he said the Nalanda tradition, the wisdom of ancient India, compared to the wisdom of ancient India, modern psychology is still at the level of kindergarten. And I don't think he's being sneering there, but in fact, I think he's spot on right. Because the modern science of the mind goes back only 130 years, and when it arose, it was already being suffocated by the ideology and the methodology of materialism. So for the last more than 100 years, introspection, mindfulness, concentration, inwardly directed attention has played only a marginal role at best in the scientific study of the mind, where all of the resources and all of the emphasis, creativity goes to studying the mind indirectly by way of brain and behavior. Well, you learn a lot about brain, a lot about behavior, but frankly, compared to Buddhism, picking up table crumbs in terms of actually understanding the deeper issues about the nature of mind. Now, I say this with respect for psychology. It sounds very deprecating, I imagine to many people, but clinical psychology, pathological psychology, developmental psychology, and other branches as well are unique to the West, and they are great prizes. But the deeper issues, where does the mind come from? How does the mind interact with the body? What happens at death? What are the potentials of mind? Does it have multiple dimensions? These are issues where truths have been discovered empirically. They are not simply religious beliefs, which is the automatic response from Westerners looking at Buddhism, categorizing it simply as a religion and thinking anything that's said within that context consists simply of articles of faith or appeals to authority. And that's simply not true. That the greatest minds, many of the greatest minds throughout Asia, have applied their genius within the context of Buddhism, made discoveries, have replicated the discoveries, and many of these are legitimately science, but because they're veiled by our categories, veiled to us by our categories, then people in the West or in modernity think of Buddhism simply as a religion. And in so doing, they miss at least two-thirds of what's happening in Buddhism.
In your studies and in your research, have you come to any conclusion about where the mind is? For instance, I don't believe the mind is inside the body. I believe it's this interconnected thing all around us. What have you found?
Well, if we take anything at all, any kind of entity that has no physical attributes and cannot be measured physically, then there's no reason, logically, to try to place it within physical space. It's a categorical error. It's like trying to ask, where are the even numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, and so forth, where are they located? Well, where? Inside your head, the frontal cortex? It makes no sense at all. And likewise, justice. Is justice in the gavel in the courtroom? Is it in the judge's brain? Where is justice? And so when it comes to the nature of mind, mental phenomena, what we experience every day subjectively, our dreams, our hopes, our fears, our afflictions, our virtues, our memories, our everything, these have no physical attributes. They cannot be measured physically. So to acknowledge that obvious fact, which is not acknowledged at all by materialists who are much more committed to the ideology than the obvious facts of experience, then to ask where the mind is located in physical space is a categorical error. It's like asking, where's pi? 3.111. Where is pi located? It doesn't make it. It's not inside the circle, as we say.
Right.
It's in an alternate space, and so the mind. This is where I'm really a follower of Buddhism, but also William James. He was not a materialistic monist. He was not a Cartesian dualist. He was a pluralist. We should recognize that reality doesn't fit into our neat little categories of mind and matter. Reality doesn't fit into any of the little categories created by human beings. And so therefore we need to be open to a wide range of phenomena that are not physical and not even mental, are not mental states, such as meaningful information. The words we're sharing right now, these are not mental states. You can hear them, but they're not physical. Meaningful information is not physical, has no physical attributes. It's not located inside the brain. And so the mind is right where it is. It's in a space of awareness, which is not a physical space. Mm-hmm. And of course, that being the case, the notion of mind emerging from neurons or the chemicals of electricity in the brain is actually nonsensical. And yet it's widely accepted by people whose deeper allegiance is to materialism than to common sense and first-person experience.
Yeah,
materialism strikes me much more like a fundamentalist religion than anything having to do with science at all.
Before we forget,
Go ahead.
I have to tell the listeners that Alan Wallace is coming to Northern California in the second week of January, Friday, January 10th, 2020, and the 11th and 12th, a weekend with Alan Wallace at the 24th Street Theater at the Sierra 2 Center for the Arts in Sacramento, our capital city. He's going to start on a Friday night, January 10th, with a talk on genuine happiness. And then the weekend is going to be a workshop with Alan Wallace and co-teacher Ava Natanya, Saturday and Sunday, January 11th and 12th, 9 a.m. to 5, at the Sierra 2 Center, but in a different part of the building. You can register, and for more details, go to 3Ws.diamondlightsac. That's diamondlightsac.org.
SAC as in SAC, Sacramento.
What did I say?
You said SAC, but just get the spelling for sure.
Yes,
SAC at the end.
SAC, which is short for Sacramento.
Indeed.
If you forgot that or something, you can always email me at sierrafriendsoftibet.org, and I'll get it.
Thank you, Joseph.
And I didn't even give you the talk yet. The name of the talk on Friday night is Genuine Happiness, an evening with Dr. B. Alan Wallace, and the weekend workshop is The Path to Genuine Happiness. And now I have to ask you, why qualify happiness with genuine?
Oh, I think it's one of the most important distinctions in any language, and I'm not being bombastic here. When we think of happiness, and I'll go back to the ancient Greeks here, because there's some universal wisdom here. You cited statements from the 13th century from a great monastic university in India that are, frankly, they're timeless, because they're as true now as they were on the opposite side of the globe 800 years ago. That there are two types of happiness recognized by Socrates, by the Buddha, and sages all over the world, East and West, ancient and modern. There's a kind of happiness that Greeks called hedonia, and this I will define this as any kind of pleasure we get because something pleasant has happened to us. That is sensual pleasures, intellectual, or some people take drugs, legal or illegal. That's because they're looking for happiness, or we're thinking happy thoughts or going down nostalgia lane. And so there's all kinds of pleasure, happiness, from wealth, from power, from fame, and so forth, and that's hedonia. And that is mundane pleasure. It's simply hedonic pleasure. But then the great sages of history, East and West, and it cuts across the boundaries of religion, philosophy, and science, specifically in positive psychology, posit another type of happiness that's variously called in Greek eudaimonia. It's called human flourishing, authentic happiness, genuine happiness. And this, very simply put, is a sense of well-being that is not dependent on pleasant stimuli. It's something we bring to the world rather than getting it from the world. And hedonia, we basically get from the world. We pursue it, try to get it, try to hold on. Whereas genuine well-being comes from the way we are living in the world, an ethical way of being, a way of nonviolence, of benevolence, coming back then to the Dalai Lama's statement, my religion is kindness. Leading our lives in the spirit of nonviolence and benevolence gives rise to a sense of well-being. Cultivating, training our minds. As the Dalai Lama said, Buddhism is a training of the mind. There's a deeper level of well-being that comes from cultivating. The mind, like a farmer, cultivates a field, so that you tap into the inner sources of well-being by purifying, transforming, and developing your mind. And then finally, and this is really perennial wisdom, there's the highest well-being, the culminating well-being, and this is the well-being of knowing reality as it is. And therein lies freedom. The truth shall make you free, is the words of Jesus, but it resonates throughout the great sages, the great philosophers, throughout history, East and West. And so my view is that in this 21st century, humanity is overwhelmingly envisioning the good life, happiness, progress, the better life, all in terms of hedonia. Consumerism, hedonism, what can we get from the world? And it's killing us. It's destroying the planet. So we better wake up and rediscover the wisdom of our own traditions, whether we're Muslim or Christian or Buddhist or, following Socrates, that the type of happiness that we can cultivate that is not competitive, that is sustainable, is genuine well-being. And so I think this is a truth for all eras, but it is an urgent truth for modernity, for the time we're living in right now, when the single-pointed focus on hedonia is literally destroying the planet, which is our home.
This is KVMR FM, Nevada City, KCPC Camino. You're listening to the Tibet Radio Hour. It airs on the first Monday of the month for an hour from about 10 afternoon to 1 p.m. My name is Joseph. The Tibet Radio Hour has been broadcasting on KVMR since 1991. If you're ever in touch with KVMR, thank them for hosting the Tibet Radio Hour, the only regular scheduled media coverage on Tibet in our hemisphere and other parts of the world. There is the Tibet World Service, which is broadcast from Washington, D.C., especially to Tibet and Asian countries. But they only started like 10 years ago. There was a show on a Pacifica station in Los Angeles, but it only was on for a couple of years and then it fizzled out. We're talking with Alan Wallace, a Tibetan scholar. Also, he's founded a couple of research centers. There's a Santa Barbara Institute for Consciousness Studies, and then there's the Center for Contemplative Research in Tuscany, Italy. I know that His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama has been to Italy quite often. Is there a lot of interest in Buddhism in Italy?
It's not so much that I chose for the second center, which we're developing right now. We purchased the land and then the adjacent house. It's under development. We hope to have it all finished by 2021. Uh-huh. I chose Italy not particularly because there's so much interest there. There's a great deal of interest in many countries, England, the United States, Australia, and so on. But because we found the optimal property in Tuscany, the home of Galileo, the home of the Scientific Revolution, the home of Leonardo da Vinci, so seminal in the Renaissance. So symbolically, it's a wonderful place, deep in culture, rich in natural beauty, basically midway between Asia and the Americas. And we found an optimal property, but also another clincher for me in choosing that property for the Center for Contemplative Research is that because of a nearby Tibetan Buddhist center, we are assured that we will be able to get long-term visas for people coming to engage in sustained full-time contemplative training for months or years on end. And that's very difficult to get, but we will because of this kind of a brother-sister relationship or close friendship between the center we're creating and one that's been there for 40 years. And so very briefly there, the vision or the driving force behind the center we're creating right now is to train individuals from wherever they may be, Singapore or India or South America, wherever they may be. And it is a secular center in the sense that it's not just for Buddhists, but to provide very rigorous, sustained contemplative training so people can develop the sophisticated tools internally to investigate and develop the nature of mind and consciousness itself. So it's a retreat center. But in addition to that, it is a research center because we will, from the day we open our doors, we will have scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists, philosophers, physicists coming to engage in collaborative research with these highly trained contemplatives. So in this way, it's unprecedented without parallel to bring together the great strengths of the contemplative traditions of Asia, specifically, or most importantly, Buddhism, or primarily Buddhism, that's where my background is, but with the mind sciences and physics, which is finding that the role of the observer is more and more increasingly important in understanding reality as a whole. If I may, Joseph, I'd like to bring in just a topic that connects the overall arching theme of your radio program.
Sure.
With this conversation, and that is Tibet. Since 1970, when I began studying Tibetan language at the University of Göttingen in Germany, most of my training, my contemplative, my spiritual training, has been in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Also Theravada, but overwhelmingly Tibetan. All four schools of Tibetan Buddhism, I've drunk from all of their wells. And so that's where I'm coming from in terms of my academic and spiritual training. And so then we look to Tibet itself, which has been preserving this tremendously rich spiritual, philosophical, mind science heritage for 1,200 years, based upon the first 1,300 years in India. And if we look at Tibet And I'm not going to idealize it. I've been there 4 times. I've lived with Tibetans for 14 years. So I'm not going to pretend like it's some Shangri-La, some ideal realm that was destroyed due to the Chinese communist invasion and occupation. And that would be silly. It's wildly oversimplistic. At the same time, there was something, and to a lesser degree, there is something still utterly unique and extraordinary about traditional Tibetan culture prior to its domination by communism, by materialism, that really did perpetrate a genocide upon that culture and killing hundreds of thousands of people. It was a tremendous tragedy. But traditional Tibet, and I've lived with Tibetans who were brought up and raised in Tibet, and symbolically, we can see this as a civilization, especially over the last 1,200 years, that had at the center of this whole civilization Buddhism, Buddha Dharma, and that was central. So there were 6,000 monasteries for 6 million people. And the leaders, the leaders of the country overwhelmingly were great spiritual leaders, rather than simply politicians or businessmen or rock stars or anything else. And so as a culture, and I do know it, I think, rather well, without idealizing it was a culture that valued eudaimonia, the inner life, inner transformation, spiritual awakening, above hedonia, above external progress, above the development of science and technology. Their science and technology was the science and technology of the human spirit, of the nature of consciousness, fully awakening to the nature of reality. And yet they were so primitive when it comes to technology, material progress. They were poor, they were backward. But I see a wonderful, kind of a marvelous complementarity between Tibet at its best and modernity, which started in Europe, Euro-America. And that is our strength is science, it's technology, it's material progress. It's the cultivation of hedonia, better health, better education, better transportation, communication. These are the great excellences of modernity, and they came out of Europe. They are Eurocentric. But as we have grown in this extrospective, this outward-looking progress, always looking outward for happiness and outward for the causes of suffering, outwards to the mind, we look to the brain. While there are many boons and the advantages there, the strengths of modernity have eclipsed the inner wisdom of Socrates, the inner wisdom of the great religious heritages of the West, almost to the point we can't see them anymore. They've been completely overwhelmed by the materialism, hedonism, and consumerism of modernity. And so we've made great progress externally, but if anything, we're digressing away from morality, away from wisdom, away from genuine happiness in this now global domination of modernity. And so the two really are like a yin-yang symbol. Tibet having made virtually no progress in terms of wealth and power and technology and science over 1,200 years, but so much progress in each generation of great beings achieving profound states of spiritualization, cultivating compassion to the greatest, highest possible level. And so I think the West has as much to learn from Tibet as Tibet has to learn from modernity. So that connects with the overall theme of your radio program since I think you said 1991 or so.
Yes. I forgot to say anything that Alan says or that I say is not necessarily the point of view or opinion of KVMR's board of directors, management staff, business supporters, volunteers, and so on and so forth. Can I challenge you, Alan?
Please do. I like it.
How do you juxtapose your use of airplanes, cars, which make exhaust, establishing centers, which cost a lot of money, even books, writing books and having them published, which costs money and other people pay for, and it contributes to materialism?
Well, I think contributes. What do you mean by materialism? That is there a carbon imprint from my getting on airplanes, which I'm going to do again to fly down to Sydney, Australia?
Yes, there is a carbon imprint.
There's no doubt about that, sure. But to say that contributes to materialism, I would say yes. The creation of books, the creation of centers, I'm on the internet. That has to make some kind of imprint. There's electricity driving this.
Yes.
And of course, I have a car, and I fly in airplanes a lot. So am I contributing to the carbon imprint? There's no question about it. Of course I am. The fact that I'm breathing, I'm not breathing out oxygen, I'm breathing out carbon dioxide. And so just my breathing, I'm contributing, but not to materialism. I'm having an impact on the environment, and that is true. But materialism, that can be understood in two ways. One is a worldview that everything boils down to space, time, matter, and energy and their emergent properties. So that's philosophical materialism. And the other kind of pragmatic materialism is that the greater good is always to be found in acquiring material goods, consuming and producing, consuming and producing. So those are two types of materialism. Everywhere I go, in every public lecture, retreat, conference, and so forth, I'm probably more, among Buddhist teachers, I'm probably more outspoken in my criticism of materialism than anybody else I know. I've studied it more than any other Buddhist teacher that I know. And so everywhere I'm going, I'm encouraging people to connect the spiritual, the contemplative, the philosophical teaching, and the religious teachings of Buddhism that I'm sharing with them as specifically to address the way that humanity right now is impacting the environment. So I'm doing this. I don't really need to. I can live now on Social Security and savings that I have. I don't need to earn any more money for the rest of my life. And I have a home in Santa Barbara. My wife is a full professor. She has an excellent salary. And I have a little cabin just above my house. And so in terms of my own self-interest, I can say if I just thought about, well, how can I take care of myself, do the best I can for myself, I would stop teaching. I would probably stop this interview right now because I could be meditating.
Right.
I'd say, bye-bye, Joseph. It's been great, but I'm busy. I'm going to go back to meditate. And this must be chewing up some energy here, so we're probably contributing to global climate change right now by having this conversation.
Absolutely.
And I would go up into my little casita, my little cabin, and I would be meditating in solitary retreat with a friendly relationship with my wife for the rest of my life, because that would just tickle me pink. But when I consider the kindness that has been shown to be me by my root Lama, my primary spiritual mentor, His Holiness Dalai Lama, and roughly another 40 Lamas from all traditions of Tibetan Buddhism as well as Theravada, and the wonderful education I received at Amherst and Stanford University. The kindness shown me, and I got it basically all for free. I had full scholarships the whole way, Amherst, Stanford, full scholarships. When I think of the tremendous kindness and the wisdom that was shared with me by my many mentors over the last 50 years or so, for me to then say, thanks a lot, I really appreciate it, and I'm just going to use that for my benefit. It doesn't strike me as being environmentally or socially, morally, or in any way the most responsible and benevolent way to return the kindness of my teachers. And it's just not just my teachers, but you have a background in Buddhism. I've been eating and drinking and having clothing and shelter my whole life. And did I make my own clothes? Did I make my own water? Did I grow my own food?
No.
And so the fact that I'm still alive at the age of 69 is due to the kindness of
Others.
Human beings all over the planet. And so I'm speaking very much as a traditional Mahayana Buddhist here. I wish passionately to repay the kindness of my teachers who have asked me to teach. And I could do that just staying home and do it all by podcast. That would be much easier for me. But people keep on wanting to have me show up in person. I guess you'll have to ask them why, because there's hundreds of hours of teachings that I've offered for free on podcasts with the Santa Barbara Institute. But they keep on inviting me. And for me to tell them, no, I like staying home, thank you. Again, I think it's not gracious. And so I consider, all right, I am one of the people who's degrading the environment every time I'm hopping an airplane, and I drive my car, and I breathe, and I eat, and I poop, and I throw out the trash. I am a contributor to this. But in terms of the negative impact I have on the planet, and indirectly, when I eat a bowl of rice, animals were killed. When you drain a rice paddy, you kill all kinds of insects, hundreds of thousands of insects. So I eat organic bread, but then the animals were killed by creating, growing the wheat and so forth. That all right, I'm being here, and there's harm by my living. But am I doing greater good by participating in this interview, by teaching, lecturing, writing books, translating books? Am I doing more good than I am harm? And if I didn't believe I was, I really would stop.
Were you impressed by that teenager from Europe who sailed across the Atlantic to speak at the United Nations and then sailed back so she wouldn't have a carbon footprint?
Did Greta Thunberg do that? I mean, she's the hero that I know of. Okay, then I think symbolic acts can be very, very important. And to my mind, she's one of the great heroes of the modern era. She didn't get the Nobel Prize this time. I hope she gets it next time, because she is a hero, and I have tremendous respect for her. And every symbolic deed that she does, including sailing across, I applaud it.
Well, we have 10 minutes.
Go ahead.
We have 10 minutes left, so let's focus on what you're going to do in January 10th, 11th, and 12th. Friday night is like a kind of an introduction to the workshop, or what would it be?
It really is. It's an introduction to the workshop. It's introducing the theme and really elaborating on the theme of genuine well-being or genuine happiness. And it's going to start out with the topic of cognitive intelligence. And cognitive is a term we all should know, but hardly anybody but psychologists do. Cognitive from the noun conation, and it's simply the faculty of desire. It has to do with our aspiration, intention, our goals, our values. And so the central theme of that evening talk will be to develop wisdom in our desires, our goals and aspirations, and to look for sustainable well-being for each of us individually, but also for countries, for cultures, for civilizations. And because what we are doing right now on the planet is not sustainable. The massive inequality of wealth, where 8 people own the same amount of assets as 3.5 billion poorest people on the planet, this is not sustainable. And those eight people, what are they thinking? But I know what they're thinking. They want more.
Yes.
They want more. Who's going to win, Jeff Bezos or, Mr. Microsoft, Bill Gates? So what is genuine happiness? That's on January 10th.
And that's 7 to 9 p.m. at the 24th Street Theater at the Sierra 2 Center for the Arts. I don't have an address for that, unfortunately. But
24th, probably 24th Street Theater should probably give it away.
On 20. That's true. And then the weekend is the next 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, January 11th and 12th, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at a different place, Curtis Hall, but in the same building, the Sierra 2 Center for Arts and Community. And the website is www.diamondlightsac.org. And you can find more. And what's the weekend workshop going to means that there's sort of can't remember the word, where there's the people there will what's going to happen at the workshop? Let's put it that way.
Well, I'm co-teaching this one. I'm very happy to say with Dr. Eva Natanya, who is an extraordinary scholar and a very experienced meditator. So if you look at her CV, she's really quite an extraordinary individual. So I'm happy to be co-teaching with her. And so this is going to be a workshop. So people participating will not just hear lectures. We will be engaging in guided meditations on 2 themes. Very simple. One is to cultivate the mind, to bring about deeper peace of mind, to develop attention skills, an inner stillness of awareness, a clear introspective awareness of what's going on in our own minds, so that we can make wise choices when thoughts, desires, emotions arise, wise choices on how to express them, but overall cultivating through the development of mindfulness, introspection, concentration, an inner equilibrium, a mental balance that opens up into an inner wellspring of genuine well-being. But to complement this attentional training, then Dr. Natanya, Dr. Eva Natanya, will be emphasizing really more of the cultivation of the heart. And it goes right back to the Dalai Lama, my religion is kindness. Well, we would all recognize that loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, impartiality, I think we all recognize these as the virtues, but how can we cultivate them? How can we deepen them? How can we extend them more broadly to be unconditional and all-embracing? And so then there'll be an intertwining of these two. On the one hand, developing attention and introspection. On the other hand, cultivating the heart. So this will be very much hands-on, very experiential. Theory just enough to deepen our experience, so that when the workshop is over, people can bring both the theories and the practices they've learned into their daily life. And they really begin to cultivate the inner fields of genuine well-being in their hearts and minds.
Again, go to 3Ws.diamondlightsac.org, DIAMONDLIGHTSAC.org. And I'm sure probably the Sierra 2 Center for the Arts probably has their own website too you could find. And if you live in Sacramento, you probably know where it is. If you're up here in the foothills, it's an hour to Sacramento. And also I want to tell you that Alan Wallace has a website, of course. And it's big. Take you at least 2 or 3 weeks to read every page and everything on there. I tried to look at it to try to get a little information. I was reading so much. There's so much on your website. Alan, let me give you 5 minutes for some final thoughts or comments that you'd like to share with the listeners.
Just a little techie stuff. There are several websites that I oversee, but one is simply alanwallace.org. That's more personal. And the other one for the Santa Barbara Institute is sbinstitute.com. And then finally, the website for the center we're creating, Italy, is centerforcontemplativeresearch.org. So that was just if people like to look into this further. And if you check me out on Amazon.com, you'll find about 40 books there of translations and books that I've written over my relatively long life. But to sum up, if we come back to what we all share in common, I like to start there, I like to end there. But all of us humans, but also all of our other fellow creatures on the planet, all the animals, the fish, birds, insects, mammals, and so forth, we're all seeking to be free of suffering. And not just now and then, we'd really like to be free of suffering, free of fear. We'd all like to find happiness and sustainable happiness, not just some nice little days here and there. And so to probe more deeply, what really makes us happy? And what are the true causes of happiness? They're not really outside. There are people who flourish, who are happy in the most dire of circumstances, and there are people who are miserable in the most felicitous of circumstances. So this is where we can all join. We can draw from the strength, the wisdom of all the great religious traditions of the world, the many philosophies of the world, and draw very much indeed from modern science as well, psychology, positive psychology, because humanity needs to wake up. We need to wake up to what really brings us happiness and not get caught up in the brainwashing and the kind of almost like a hypnotic trance of thinking if we just consume more and produce more, become more fluent, more powerful, more famous, we'll somehow be happier. The evidence is against that, and we need to wake up because the trajectory we're on right now, it leads to tragedy for each individual when we come to the end of life, and it's undermining human civilization. So that would be my invitation to all listening. Let's join hands here and explore together. How can we flourish? How can we find happiness in a sustainable way?
It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Alan. It's you really say a lot of good, positive things. I appreciate it. And I wish you good luck coming to Sacramento. Have you been to Sacramento before?
I have, but not recently. I was involved in a scientific study for which the academic base was UC Davis. And so it's not in Sacramento, but it's very nearby.
Okay, so it's the weekend of January 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And I'm going to say goodbye to Alan, and you could call me at the station here, 265-9555, if you need the website again. Thank you very much, Alan Wallace. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Joseph. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.
Take care. Be well.
You too. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Ringo Himalaya lo lo
This is KVMR FM, Nevada City, KCPC Camino. Thanks for listening. Again, anything I said or Alan Wallace said is not necessarily the point of view or opinion of KVMR's Board of Directors, management staff, business supporters, listener supporters, or volunteers. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And thanks to one business supporter, Mountain Stream Meditation, welcoming the community for meditation, day-long retreats and classes at the Nevada City Insight Center on Zion Street. Group meditations are Mondays, 7 p.m., and Fridays, 11:30 to noon. Mountain Stream Meditation, mtstream.org. Everybody's been getting this flyer in their mailbox. Shen Yun, 5,000 Years of Civilization Reborn. This full glossy threefold pamphlet of Chinese acrobatic dancing and singing and everything. And I thought, sure, it was a Chinese Communist Party plot. On the back it says, Shen Yun cannot perform in China today. Based in New York, Shen Yun brings you a performance untainted by communist rule. Then I wondered where they got the money to send this to everybody. But it's from some Falun Buddha Study Association in San Francisco. And when I've gone to marches in San Francisco on Tibet Uprising Day, you see Falun Gong Buddhist people in the march and demonstrating in front of the Chinese embassy. So I don't know what to say about this. I'd have to research it more, but I'm very curious about how this arrived twice in my mailbox and everybody else's mailbox. Okay, I'll see you next month on the Tibet Radio Hour when I'll be speaking with Glenn Mullen, another Tibetan Buddhist scholar, author, and lecturer and workshopper and things like that. Please stay tuned to KVMR for the rest of the day. Coming up next is the Fat Radio Hour with the not-so-fat Felton Pruitt. And then other people are on later, Pet Sounds, and other stuff. Tashidele.
Ya